From 1939 to 1945, Adolf Hitler led Germany into a war that engulfed the world and left Europe devastated. How did one man and his ideology bring so much destruction to the continent? Today, we'll take a look at how Hitler and the Nazi regime managed to take over half of Europe. To understand how Hitler took control of Europe, we must first look at how he came to power in Germany. In the early 1920s, Germany was reeling from the effects of World War I and the harsh terms of the Treaty of Versailles. Hitler, a former soldier, saw an opportunity to channel the nation's frustration. In 1920, he joined the National Socialist German Workers' Party, the Nazis. By 1923, he attempted a failed coup known as the Beer Hall Putsch, but it wasn't the end of his ambition. After spending time in prison, Hitler wrote Mein Kampf, outlining his plans for Germany's resurgence and the expansion of the so-called Aryan race. After consolidating power, Hitler began rearming Germany in violation of the Treaty of Versailles. He believed that Germany needed Lebensraum, living space for the German people, and that space would be taken by force from neighboring countries. In 1936, Hitler boldly remilitarized the Rhineland, a region that had been demilitarized after World War I. The move was a gamble. Britain and France did nothing to stop him. 2 years later, in 1938, Germany annexed Austria in the Anschluss, again without resistance from the international community. Later that year, Hitler demanded control of the Sudetenland, a German-speaking region of Czechoslovakia. Britain and France, hoping to avoid another war, agreed to Hitler's demands at the Munich conference. This policy of appeasement only emboldened Hitler, and by March 1939, he had taken over the rest of Czechoslovakia without firing a single shot. Hitler's next target was Poland. On September 1st, 1939, the world was plunged into war when Nazi Germany launched a brutal invasion of Poland using a new strategy called Blitzkrieg, or lightning war. Blitzkrieg was designed for speed and overwhelming force, with tanks, aircraft, and infantry working in unison. Poland fell quickly, and within weeks it was divided between Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union, who had signed a non-aggression pact just before the invasion. Britain and France, honoring their alliance with Poland, declared war on Germany on September 3, 1939. The Second World War had officially begun. After a relatively quiet period known as the Phony War, Hitler turned his attention westward in 1940. He launched a blitzkrieg against Denmark and Norway to secure access to vital resources before moving to his primary target, France. France had built a defensive line, the Maginot Line, along its border with Germany, but Hitler outflanked it by invading through Belgium and the Ardennes Forest. The speed and ferocity of the Nazi assault stunned the Allies. Within 6 weeks, German forces captured Paris, and France surrendered in June 1940. France, one of the world's major powers, had fallen. Hitler's grip on Western Europe was now secure, with Nazi-occupied France serving as a symbol of his growing dominance. Next, Hitler turned his sights on Britain. But instead of a ground invasion, he attempted to subdue the British through air power in what became known as the Battle of Britain. In the summer of 1940, the Luftwaffe launched a massive bombing campaign aimed at destroying the Royal Air Force and breaking British morale. But despite intense bombing raids on cities like London, the Royal Air Force held firm, and by October, Hitler's plans for an invasion of Britain were postponed indefinitely. Winston Churchill, Britain's defiant leader, famously declared, "We shall never surrender." Britain remained free, but Europe was still under Hitler's iron fist. By 1941, Hitler controlled most of Western Europe, but his ambitions didn't stop there. On June 22, 1941, he launched Operation Barbarossa, the largest military invasion in history, against the Soviet Union. Despite initial successes and rapid advances, the Nazi war machine soon encountered fierce Soviet resistance, harsh winter conditions, and logistical nightmares. By the winter of 1941, the German advance stalled outside Moscow, marking the beginning of a long and brutal Eastern Front. Hitler's decision to invade the Soviet Union would eventually prove disastrous, but for a time, it seemed like nothing could stop the Nazi war machine. By the end of 1941, Hitler controlled much of Europe, from Norway to Greece, and from France to the outskirts of Moscow. His empire stretched over vast territories, but it came at an unspeakable cost. Nazi occupation was brutal. In the East, millions of civilians were murdered or deported. Resistance movements sprang up in many occupied countries, but they faced savage repression. And behind the front lines, the Holocaust, the systematic extermination of Jews, Romani people, and other minorities, was in full swing. Despite Hitler's early success, the tide of the war began to turn by 1942. In the East, Soviet forces began to push back after the Battle of Stalingrad, while in North Africa, Allied forces dealt the Nazis a crushing defeat. In 1944, the Allies landed in Normandy, France on D-Day, opening a second front. The combined efforts of Allied forces in the West and the Soviet Union in the East slowly crushed Hitler's empire. By May 1945, Nazi Germany was defeated and Europe was free. Adolf Hitler's dream of a 1,000-year Reich ended in ruins. His quest for domination left half of Europe in flames and millions dead. The legacy of Hitler's rise and the terror he unleashed remains a solemn reminder of the dangers of unchecked power and hatred. Thanks for watching this video. Subscribe our channel for more videos like this.